Last Breath is directed by Alex Parkinson and is based off the documentary also directed by Parkinson about the true story of these experienced deep-sea divers who fight the elements to rescue a fellow diver who's trapped hundreds of feet down on the ocean floor. The film stars Woody Harrelson as Duncan Alcock, who's one day away till forced retirement and who's the older leader, father figure-like character whose nickname is Sat Daddy. He watches over Chris, played by Finn Cole, who's excited that he's chosen to help fix the underwater pipeline in the very dangerous North Sea, and about marrying his fiancée Morag, played by Bobby Rainsbury. Simu Liu plays Dave, who is the third diver on the mission, who's a little rough around the edges and isn't a very social person while at work. During their dive 300 feet under the ocean floor, they focus on fixing part of the pipeline when the ship that brought them there and that they're connected to loses engine power and then starts to drift off course with the divers with them. One of the divers gets caught on a structure and is essentially an anchor to the ship until his umbilical tether snaps and he drifts down to the ocean floor with only 10 minutes of air until his last breath. It becomes a race against time as they try to get the engines online again, head back to the dive site, and rescue the diver before his air runs out. I hadn't heard anything about this film, and I hadn't even seen the trailer before going into it. I'd seen the documentary Last Breath, I want to say a few years ago, but didn't really make the connection until probably 15 minutes before seeing the film that they were connected, or the same story. This movie isn't a bad movie. It's not a great movie either, but I enjoyed it for the most part. The problem I had mainly is that the documentary is so much better. It's more intense, you have real footage and interviews with the real people who were involved. Making this movie, at least to me, felt like kind of a miss. Maybe if this film was done before the documentary, it would have made more sense, but it sort of feels like reenactment footage that should have been for the actual documentary. This film doesn't add anything that the documentary didn't give you, and it's just a watered-down version of the events that gives you maybe an emotional response that the documentary may not have got you, which I guess is fine. I just didn't understand the reasoning behind making this movie, especially since the director also did the documentary too. If you want to see this movie, don't watch the documentary first. If you end up watching the movie and then you want to see the documentary, go over to iTunes or wherever you stream movies. It's like $3.99 to rent and $7.99 to buy. It's actually worth the watch. The writing in this movie is pretty bland. Nothing really great here. There's some dumb jokes Woody Harrelson's character tries to pull off to keep the film light at times, and they feel kind of like weird dad jokes. The relationship between Chris and his fiancée I enjoyed for the most part, especially toward the end of the movie when he tries to explain the events that occurred to her, essentially lying to her. Actually, now that I think about it, it was sort of messed up. The cinematography is what I think makes this movie what it is and what makes it good. There's some fantastic underwater scenes shot in this film, which they did in a saltwater tank in Malta, and they did it at night, and they shot there 3 weeks underwater from dusk till dawn. I thought the look and feel was pretty impressive and gave me some anxiety at times in the dark solitude of the tank. There's a great scene when the lost diver is walking around the ocean floor trying to find his way back to where he had drifted from. With only an underwater flare, it was a little strange that there wasn't any sea life around the divers at all during the whole film, but I also have no idea what 300 feet down in the ocean looks like, or if there's any sea life down there at all. I would think so, but again, I have no idea. I really enjoy the beginning of the film, I think more than the rescue scenes, because you see a lot of what goes into prepping for a dive. There are a lot of great shots of the equipment, very tight macro shots, and great shots of the decompression tank, living quarters. It's really nice that you get to see how they get to what they call the bell, where they do the dive, from the compressed living quarters. There's some great shots of the dive that I really enjoyed, and I want to say that they used actual footage from the real dive when they found the lost diver, because it was pretty haunting when you see it. He's out of air and twitching. It's kind of disturbing, and it looks very real. Once the diver is lost, they give you an on-screen timer showing how much air he has left, and after he's out of air, you get another timer that shows you how long he's been without air. I expected something like that, but I still appreciated it because it gives you some perspective during the events and the anxiousness of beating the ticking clock, essentially. It's actually a pretty short film, clocking in at around an hour and 33 minutes, which was nice considering that his air runs out in 10 minutes. They didn't try to drag the movie out in a way that would make the film seem completely unrealistic. There is some heart to the movie and some sweetness to it, and you could say it's sort of a love story, sort of, depending on how you judge the events at the end of the film. It's an interesting take on the true events, and I think you would enjoy this film if you're into diving or rescue films. It's not going to be as intense as a Black Hawk Down or Captain Phillips, but it does have some pretty intense moments. The Last Breath has some pretty great underwater cinematography. It gives you some really cool sense in the beginning about what goes into prepping for a dive and has some really intense moments. The writing, unfortunately, is pretty bland and the jokes kind of hard to choke down, but I did enjoy the characters, and all in all, it's not a bad movie. It's not a great movie either. I'm giving Last Breath 2 stars out of 5 for all these reasons. It's a great movie to take your dad to. It's actually a great film for the whole family. It's rated PG-13 for a very small amount of strong language and for some anxious thrills, but all in all, it's pretty safe for anyone over 13, maybe even a few years younger. If you've seen Last Breath, let me know what you thought. And if you've seen the documentary, I want to know your thoughts on that film too. I really love reading your comments and responding to you. Thanks again for subscribing and liking. It really means so much. And remember, don't wait till it streams. Let's go to the theater and let's see it together.
What happens now? Your umbilical. It's gonna snap. I will come back for you, but you have to get yourself back to the top. I can't rescue you if I can't find you. Understand?
Just make sure I'm alright.